The Orioles lose 2 out of 3 against the Pittsburgh Pirates this past weekend. Hello, everyone. My name is Tyler, and this is the Warehouse Podcast. Let's talk about what was a strange weekend for the Baltimore Orioles, in my opinion. They lose 2 games on walk-off, sort of getting a taste of their own medicine following the Kansas City Royals series, in which they won 2 games on walk-offs. The weather was weird. It wasn't baseball weather. The pitching had some really good moments and some really terrible moments. The defense had some spectacular plays and then some boneheaded ones, and then the offense sort of just didn't show up beyond game one. So what we'll do here is go through each of the games, give a little analysis on them one at a time rather, give out some awards, and then preview the series ahead against the Boston Red Sox. So let's start with game one. A chilly afternoon in Pittsburgh, a first pitch temp of 40 degrees for what was the Pirates home opener of the 2024 season. But Grayson Rodriguez, despite the chilly weather, was hot as it gets. The second-year pitcher ends up going 6 1/3 innings, striking out 7 and allowing 2 runs, both coming on a pair of solo homers to O'Neill Cruz and Jared Triolo. Meanwhile, the O's hitters were similarly diced up by Pittsburgh starter Jared Jones, who induced a 38% whiff rate rather, on the day. His four-seam fastball was particularly tough in the cold, averaging 97 miles per hour and flirting with triple digits. You could argue Jones was even a little bit better than Rodriguez in terms of stuff on the day, but Rodriguez, I believe, got one more out than Jones did. But unfortunately for Jones, he was unable to sneak his fastball past Ryan O'Hearn in the second inning. The O's DH was able to get every bit of the offering and deposit it into center field for an early 1-0 lead. And then in the third, Gunnar Henderson doubled the lead with a solo shot of his own, this time off of a changeup, 90-mile-per-hour changeup, that also went beyond the wall in center field. After the aforementioned Cruz homer in the fifth, Adley Rutschman answered back in the O's half of the seventh with a single through the left side of the infield to knock in Ramon Urias, and then a double for Anthony Santander right after that brought home Henderson to make it a 4-1 advantage for the road team. And then Cedric Mullins put the final touch on the scoreline with the Orioles' third solo homer of the game and what was the fifth between the two teams in the eighth inning to make it 5-2. And then Craig Kimbrell was called upon to close things out in the ninth, and that is exactly what he did, finally getting his first save for his new ball club. He struck out Rowdy Tellez and Henry Davis before getting a Triolo fly out to get the final out of the game. And there you have it, his first closer, or his first save as the closer of the Baltimore Orioles. O's win 5-2. So let's talk about some of the takeaways here. First, I thought the pitching was really good overall for the Orioles. This was up and down, both the starters and the relievers. Rodriguez, obviously, with his second win of the season in as many starts. His fastball velocity was down a little bit, but I think I attribute that mostly to the cold weather. You know, baseball players aren't going to be facing 40 degrees, 30 degrees, snow 90% of the season, 99% of the season even. So the fact that he faced that, still had decent velocity. I think he was averaging like 95, 96 on his fastball. You know, that's plenty to get by. And he touched 97.5 was his max here, according to Baseball Savant. So that was down a tick or two overall from what he did in the first game of the season. But, you know, like I said, the cold weather and also probably being amped up for opening day, sort of maybe a little bit better than you would have expected opening day. And then, you know, the cold weather is what it is. It's tough to get absolutely 100% loose in those conditions. So all things considered, I think he did really well there. And Rodriguez is kind of, you know, approaching that realm for me where you feel like every time he goes out on the mound, the Orioles have the advantage in the pitching matchup. You know, that's not to say that he is necessarily a bona fide ace on any staff in baseball. He's not even the ace on the Orioles staff. He's potentially the number 3 on this staff with a healthy Kyle Bradish, but he's, I think you could argue he's the best number 3 in baseball, potentially. And beyond that, I think he could be an ace on a third of the staffs in baseball right now. But the Orioles have the luxury of him pitching second, and it's quite a luxury they have indeed. Then on to the bullpen. It was a trio, kind of the main trio, I think, of Danny Coulombe, Yenier Cano, and Craig Kimbrell. I think those are the three you'll see most of the time when the Orioles are in a 3-run or less lead situation, and they were perfect here. 2.2 perfect innings, including 5 strikeouts. All of them sort of the same story as Rodriguez, with decreased velocity in the cold weather. Cano really had decreased velocity. His sinker was down 3.5 miles per hour. His slider was down 4 miles per hour, but you know, still got the job done. Got 2 whiffs. He only threw a few pitches. He only threw 11 pitches, 5 swings, 2 whiffs, so a 40% whiff rate, but obviously a really small sample size there, but all in all, did well. And then Craig Kimbrell, again, a little bit less on his fastball velocity. It averaged only 93 miles per hour, but I think he's spoken before about how he's not necessarily concerned about velocity at this stage in his career. It's more about movement, getting the ball to move and placing it where he wants it. And he was able to do that here. And I think through certainly his first two, and we'll talk about, first three, because he does pitch a second game in this series. I feel okay about Craig Kimbrell. He's not Felix Bautista, as we've said before on the podcast, but I think he's going to be just fine in terms of closing out games for the Orioles. And the fact that his blown save in his first attempt this year against the Angels was sort of fluky with the ball that just sort of fell in, or against the Royals rather. It's you don't feel too bad about Craig Kimbrell right now. So I think all good stuff from the bullpen in game one. And then in the lineup, this is the one game where the bats really came to play. Scored 5 runs, 3 of which came on solo home runs. Henderson, Rutschman, and Santander combined to go 6 for 15 with 3 RBI, and Henderson scored twice. And I think those are the three, right? Those are the three guys you need the Orioles to have going to think you're going to have a chance to win most days. Obviously, it's not going to happen for him all the time. We've seen Ryan Mountcastle take over a game before. I think Cedric Mullins is capable of it, of course. But in general, the trio of Henderson, Rutschman, Santander is really the guys that the Orioles are going to depend on. So it's great to see them have a good game. Score 5 runs overall. Most days you score 5 runs, I think you're going to like your chances of winning, especially with Grayson Rodriguez on the mound. The other thing I wanted to mention here was that Colton Cowser got the start in left field, went 1 for 2, and then was removed for pinch hitter, which was Austin Hayes. So potentially we're seeing the starts of what could be a full-on platoon in left field. The Orioles had they faced one right-handed pitcher in game one. Cowser got the start. They faced 2 left-handed pitchers in games 2 and 3, and Hayes got the starts there. So we could potentially be seeing a platoon situation there, which we'll get into a little bit later. But I think that's kind of the big takeaways from game one. So let's get into game two here real quick. So game two, it was a game the Orioles really had no right of really being in. It took the offense until the 6th inning to even record a hit, and that hit was a Jorge Mateo pop-up into shallow center field that no one on the Pirates really seemed interested in catching. It fell right in front of center fielder Jack Sawinski and behind second baseman Williams. They kind of were both looking at each other. To me, it seemed like that should have been Sawinski's ball. He's coming in on the ball. Williams is going back on the ball. Williams, I think, was even looking like, all right, Jack, are you going to call the ball or not? He didn't, and the ball kind of just fell in. And then, credit to Mateo. He was running hard the whole way, which he always does. And he ended up legging it into a double to break up the no-hitter. Probably the weakest hit double you're going to see in a long time. But credit to Mateo, and also sort of an indictment on the Orioles offense that's how long it took for them to even get a person or a hit on the board. And it already at that point in the game, though, the Orioles were trailing 3-0 because starter Tyler Wells had given up all 3 runs that he would end up allowing in that second inning. The first coming on RBI single from Rowdy Tellez, and then a 2-run homer for Joey Bart in his Pirates debut. The Pirates have a pretty interesting catching situation right now with Bart and Henry Davis, 2 former top prospects. Davis obviously more recently than Bart. Bart kind of been given up on by the San Francisco Giants, but sort of a lot of young star power there, at least at one point in their careers. But that is how the Orioles got down 3-0 from one bad inning for Tyler Wells, which was overall a decent outing for him. The Orioles would finally break through on the scoreline in the 7th inning with a pair of runs. Santander led off with a walk, scooted to third on a Jordan Westberg double, and then scored on an Austin Hayes ground out. And then Mullins drove in the second run of the inning on a sacrifice fly to make it a 1-run deficit. So, sort of manufacturing runs there. I think in the moment, we probably would have loved to have seen even more come out of that than just 2 runs. You get the first couple guys on, runners in the corners, and you only get 2 runs out of it. Doesn't feel great, but they were back in the game at 3-2. And then in a do-or-die 9th inning for the Orioles, they did get it done. Westbrook singled, as did pinch hitter Ryan O'Hearn, before a wild pitch from Pirates closer David Bednar moved both runners into scoring position. Then the next batter, Mullins, grounded to first baseman Tellez, who threw the ball home to try and nab Westberg, who had run on contact, but the throw wasn't in time. Westberg got under the tag, and the Orioles tied it at 3-3. And that actually put the Orioles in really good position to win the game. Now with runners in the corners, just 1 out and the game tied. But Colton Cowser followed with a ground out to shortstop Cruz. He threw the ball home also, And then this time he did get the slower running O'Hearn out at home. Then there was a pinch hit situation where Tony Kemp, the lefty, came in to face the righty Bednar. He substituted for Mateo, but he was unable to come through either, grounding out to end the inning. And then Craig Kimbrell returned again in game two for his second consecutive appearance, this time not in a save opportunity, but still obviously a very high leverage situation for the Orioles. And he was able to hold the Pirates scoreless in the bottom of the ninth and send the game into extras. Both teams were only able to score the Manfred man in the 10th inning, although the Orioles were very lucky to not allow more than that in the 10th inning. Mike Baumann came in to pitch the inning. He allowed a single to put runners on the corners, then walked Sawinski to load the bases and issued another walk to Edward Olivares to tie the game, keep the bases loaded, and still have no outs. So that prompted Brandon Hyde to make a switch there. Baumann, not your best showing. They brought in the lefty Danny Coulombe, and he was fantastic. He got a pop out of Tellez, and then a ground out fielder's choice of Triolo, and then a strikeout of Bart to escape an insane jam that Baumann had created, send the game to an 11th inning, and it felt sort of magic in that moment. Like, okay, if they're not going to allow a run there, then they're going to definitely win this game. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. The Orioles couldn't make it matter with their offense in the 11th inning. They were unable to even push across the Manfred man as Santander struck out, Westberg lined out, and then O'Hearn grounded out. And then that puts you in quite a pickle going into the bottom of the frame where you haven't scored and you know the Pirates start with a runner on second base. And that was just a tough situation for Jonathan Heasley to come into out of the bullpen. And he was unable to get it done. He did get Ke'Bryan Hayes to line out. That was thanks to a really nice play in center field by Cedric Mullins. But then O'Neal Cruz followed with a single anyway. Cruz kind of killed the Orioles in this series, and the runner at second scored for the walk-off win, 5-4. So analysis, it was a really ugly game for the Bats. They managed just 4 hits. Like I said, didn't get one until the 6th inning, and it was that weak double by Mateo. And then it was an 11-inning game, though, right? So they only had 4 hits and 3 walks in 11 innings. Not ideal. The top 4 hitters went hitless. Like I said, can't really have that happen and expect the Orioles to win very much. Jordan Westberg was the only one in the lineup to get on base more than one time, and the entire team went 0 for 14 with runners in scoring position. So it was just one of those games where, yeah, the Orioles offense didn't really do a lot. The Pirates offense didn't do too much outside of that one inning against Wells. They couldn't even score another run with bases loaded and no outs against Danny Coulombe. Not that Coulombe's any slouch by any means, but you can't get a run in that situation. The Pirates offense was bad too, but the Orioles 0 for 14 with runners in scoring position, no hits from the top 4 hitters. It was a terrible game from the offense. And that's something that I think a lot of people are getting a little worried about with the offense in general, which we can talk about later. But I do think you have to give credit to pretty much the entire bullpen, apart from Baumann. Baumann was bad, clearly didn't record an out and loaded up the bases to give Coulombe a ridiculous situation to get out of. But Dylan Tate, Keegan Aiken, Jacob Webb, and Kimbrel were all pretty good. And then Heasley came into a really tough spot that I don't know that you expect anybody to really succeed in, and certainly not Heasley, who is potentially the last guy on the roster at this point, or maybe like the 25th, if you want to say Tony Kemp is below him. So I don't really blame Heasley there. Really, the only guy I'm picking on in this one is Baumann, and he just wasn't good. There's really no analysis to be done there. He was walking guys. He wasn't finding the zone. His fastball velocity was down. The knuckle curve just wasn't working. He got no whiffs on 6 swings. And Baumann has, I think, not looked fantastic to start the season regardless. It's tough because I felt like he's a guy that I've liked for a long time. He's got a lot of good stuff. He's got a lot of pitches for a bullpen guy, but it's just not really working for him right now. And there's only so many spots on the roster, so you could see a situation where Baumann gets sent down at some point because the Orioles just need every spot on the bullpen to work right now, and Baumann's just not doing the job. And then Tyler Wells, I think he was pretty good outside of that one poor inning. Let's see if I can look at his numbers real quick. Fastball velocity was about average. His curveball was actually up a few ticks, which is kind of interesting. And he had a 22% whiff rate, which is a little bit low, but Wells isn't a huge strikeout guy anyway. His issue is always home runs, and unfortunately, he did allow a home run in this game. And that's kind of the thing with him is if he can keep the ball in the park, he's usually going to do pretty well, but it's always like that one that's a little bit of a killer, you know. But at the end of the day, five and a third, 3 runs, that's competitive. That keeps you right in the game, and you would expect the Orioles to, not necessarily win that game because then you've got 3+ innings to get through from the bullpen, and that's a lot to ask. And when the Orioles bats just aren't getting the job done against a relatively soft tossing lefty, which is that becoming an issue for the Orioles? That's people have talked about that having issues with left-handed pitching, and we'll touch on that at the end as well. But yeah, Wells was fine. I think he's pitching about as well as you would expect, like a 4.5 ERA type of guy. He was a little bit better than that last year, obviously, especially in the first half. But through 2 starts, Tyler Wells has been perfectly fine and certainly not the root of any of the issues for the Orioles in their Game 2 loss here. So let's move on to Game 3, which was more of the same, unfortunately, from the Orioles lineup. They scored just twice, and both of those runs came in the 4th inning. And it was in that inning that a Ryan Mountcastle double drove in Rutschman, and then a Santander single brought home Mountcastle for a 2-0 lead. And that was it for the Birds. But fortunately, Dean Kremer was so good that those 2 runs seemed like they would be enough for most of the game. Kremer ended up going 7 innings and allowed just 1 run, which was unearned on 5 hits and 6 strikeouts. That 1 run came across in the 5th inning, and it was the result of an error that got charged to Kremer. Although Mateo, I think, deserves some of the blame there, and some of that could be from him learning second base still. But what happened was on a comebacker to Kremer, he threw to Mateo to try and start the double play. And so Mateo, coming from second base, is still on the second base side of the bag. I think he's expecting the ball to be thrown to the second base side, to kind of give him some momentum to throw the ball back towards first base to finish the double play up. But instead, Kremer kind of threw it to the left side of the bag towards shortstop, and Mateo seemed to not really be able to get his feet right to get over to there and snag the ball. And he just kind of whiffed on trying to catch it, and Henderson wasn't able to react as like backup. The ball sailed into center field, and the Pirates got nobody was out. So instead of having the inning be over, they now had runners on first and third with 1 out. And then a sacrifice fly from Henry Davis followed to score the Pirates' first run of the day. And prior to that, the only time the Pirates had really come close to scoring was in the 3rd inning when O'Neill Cruz, of course, drove a long double to right center field. But then there was a perfect relay in to Nab Triolo, who was trying to score at the plate, and that kept the game scoreless at the time. But really, Kremer was fantastic. And then you fast forward to the 9th inning, and it was Yenier Cano that was called on for the save because Kimbrel had pitched the previous 2 games, and Brendan Hyde doesn't like to use pitchers 3 days in a row. Cano really struggled here. He loaded the bases on a pair of singles and a walk, and then he was able to eventually get the first out of the inning when Mountcastle fielded a Rowdy Tellez bouncer and threw home to get the force out. Initially, the runner was ruled safe, which was like a baffling call. Even if you listen to the Pirates call of it, they're like, and he's out at the plate. Oh no, he's safe. That's a weird call. The Orioles are going to immediately challenge this, and yeah, he was out, and there was no like doubt about it. It wasn't even that close of a play. It was a bad call by the umpire. They did review it. It was corrected out, and the Orioles had their first out of the game, and then they almost got out of it somehow, some way, but that brought up Olivares, who hit a ball up the middle, and Henderson made a nice play to sort of dive and field it, and he got the force out at second base right away, and then made a wayward throw to first base that went out of play, and that scored both the tying run and the winning run. Now, obviously, in retrospect, it probably would have been better for Henderson to just eat the ball after the force out at second base, and yes, the game would have been tied, but at least they could have faced one more hitter, and potentially the Orioles and Cano could have gotten out of it, and then you know what, you figure it out in extra innings. You got the off day coming up. You can pretty much empty the bullpen and move on. But that's not what happened. And I will say it would have been a very close play, even if with a perfect throw from Henderson. I can't say whether or not he absolutely had to make the throw. It would have been very close. And ultimately he probably should have just eaten it. But again, that's a tough thing to decide in the moment there. As far as analysis for the game, Kremer was fantastic. I think, Jesse talks about this all the time as the guy's kind of a gamer, and he always seems like up for the big moments. And this felt like a big moment, right? They had lost a game. The Orioles are still kind of not really they just don't feel like they're on their feet just yet. I know they've got a winning record still, but something doesn't seem like it's clicking just yet. And Kremer always seems to be the guy that, okay, it's a big moment. I'll come in here and I'll right the ship. Of course, he didn't do that in the ALDS last year, but in general, he always seems to step up in the big moments. And even though, he doesn't have the best stuff on the staff, he is a guy that makes it feel like the Orioles can win every time he's out there because he's just always competitive. He's always in the zone. It seems like he gets very intense on the mound, as they all do, but he in particular just like seems like he transforms from like a goofball on the bench when they kind of show him when he's not pitching to like he is stone faced and serious when he is pitching, and he's just a different guy. And some guys just have that it factor, and I think Dean Kremer is one of them. So his whiff rate not huge, only 17%, but he was getting a lot of weak contact, and it was just one of those good games for Dean Kremer where he's not giving up home runs. That's again kind of his bugaboo as well, and he just looked really good here. So positive stuff for Dean Kremer, absolutely. And then on the offense, it was bad. Outside of Mountcastle and his 3 hits, they were terrible. They had just 3 at-bats with runners in scoring position. So this is a little bit different from game 2 where they wasted a million opportunities. This time they couldn't even create the opportunities at all. It wasn't like a clutch problem. It was just a traffic issue. They didn't get enough traffic on the bases. And I think that Brandon Hyde even said something similar. Like, we just aren't getting guys on base right now, and it's not working out. I'm sorry. I have a note here I'm reading. The Orioles didn't get enough runners on base. 6 hits, only 2 for extra bases. And one of those was a Mateo hit to right field that Connor Joe like picked up 2 different times and dropped, that Mateo maybe could have gotten a double. I think they did rule it a double, but I don't know. I think he was only going to second because Joe dropped it one time. And then he was pulling up at second and saw that Joe dropped it a second time and motored around to third base. So I think they credited him with a double and then Joe with a 1 base error, but that really could have been a single that Joe had 2 errors on. But so, that was one of the 2 extra base hits that the Orioles got, and it was not particularly hard hit ball, or not a particularly, well positioned ball, I guess, to get you multiple bases there. And then Cano, he just wasn't fooling anybody. I want to look at his numbers for the game as well. He had no whiffs on 9 swings. And you compare that to, I think he pitched in game 1, right? And I think I might have already mentioned his numbers there, but if you excuse me for a second, he had 2 whiffs on 5 swings in game 1, no whiffs on 9 swings in game 2, or game 3 rather. So it just wasn't fooling anybody. And he's obviously a good reliever, but he's one of those guys that I think is very volatile. There's probably a reason he didn't really stick in the big leagues until he was 29 years old. He's a guy that maybe struggles with his release point, struggles with his grips, struggles with his movement, and that seemed to be the issue in game 3 here. He just could not get the ball past the Pirates hitters. But it's also, he's a good reliever, and he was good for so long in 2023. He's been good in moments in 2024, and I think he's a guy you take the good with the bad, and ultimately the good will far outweigh the bad. Also, evidence of Hyde kind of sticking to his guns with his usage philosophies. And this could be not just Hyde, but the Orioles in general, is we're not going to put guys out there 3 days in a row, even with a day off, to follow. We want to keep these guys fresh. If we lose one game, that's okay, as long as we win, the next game. It's sort of that philosophy of it's a long season and there's no reason to overreact to any one situation or any one slump or anything like that. Like, ultimately, we know the talent we have, and it's going to play itself out on the field, and that means keeping these guys fresh as much as possible. So that's just how the Orioles operate, and I'm sure some people have issues with that in a vacuum, but it's obvious that that's kind of what they're going to do here. And then Gunnar is a bit of a roller coaster right now at shortstop. I not that he's bad, because he's not bad. He's makes incredible plays, and ultimately I think he's a net positive at the position, and I don't think it's even close because he gets to some balls that other guys don't get to. He's got a really strong arm. He plays the position, I think, very similarly to how Bryce Harper would play right field, or how he runs the bases. Like, my goal is to get to the ball and then I'll figure it out, sort of thing. And he's wild and a little aggressive, and I think he probably still has some learning to do in terms of control and sometimes making the smart and boring decision. And I guess this is all sort of in reference to that final play where he caught the ball, made the out, threw to first base. It really wasn't even close to the bag. And obviously, he's trying to make a play to win the game, and that's amazing. And I think that is going to win the Orioles a lot of games. And so I don't want him to stop. But there are situations where you have to go, okay, the goal here is to get an out because if they score a run, the game is still happening. If they score 2 runs, the game is over. So I want to ultimately not allow them to score 2 runs, whatever I can do. And that sort of didn't seem to be in the brain. The brain was let's go win the game right now. And that's I think something that comes with age and experience is understanding, you know, yes, I want to make an amazing play, but sometimes you got to make the boring conservative play and live to see another day. And that just didn't happen there. But again, as I said, I'm not necessarily suggesting he changes how he plays or anything like that, but just sometimes take your foot off the gas and live to see another day. But obviously, Gunnar Henderson is a net positive on this team in every aspect of the game. Good defender, great base runner, great hitter. Don't change Gunnar, but just slow down sometimes. um, so that's the long and the short of it for the game analysis there. So I want to get into some awards here for MVP. I'm going to give it to Grayson, simply because it was very cold out there and he looked great anyway. And I think to me the dude is looking like an ace, and his development makes me worry a lot less about the rotation beyond 2024. We know we have Corbin Burns this year. We know John Means is coming back, and that could be fantastic. That could be disappointing. We don't know, but I think for 2024, the Orioles rotation is going to be quite good. Even if Kyle Bradish is hurt or not, I think obviously if he comes back, that's a humongous boost. But if he doesn't, I understand. And there's other things there. You've got to get healthy. You've got to get right so you have that career you need to have. But even with Burns, Rodriguez, Means eventually, Wells, Kremer, Irvin pitching in, I think the rotation is going to be solid. But once Burns is gone, you go to 2025 and you've got, okay, Baradish is coming back from an injury potentially, means we don't know what he's going to do this year. Potentially the Orioles go and get somebody, maybe a young guy comes up in a Povich or a McDermott or an Armbruster or something and shows something. But minus Burns is a huge loss, which I'm just sort of just assuming is happening in 2025. There's no guarantee there, but that would be a huge loss. But if Grayson is this guy, if he's this guy that even when he doesn't have his best stuff, even when it's cold outside, he still looks like an absolute stud, then the 2025 Orioles are going to be just fine because now it's Grayson who is pitching like a Cy Young candidate, Bradish who has been a Cy Young candidate, potentially they trade for somebody else. Now you're talking about, okay, this is a team that competes year after year. And yeah, they go get some mercenaries like a Burns, but those aren't the guys that are the bedrock of the organization. It's these guys like Grayson who they drafted and developed. Obviously, I know Duquette drafted Grayson, but he really took off when the Elias regime came in. And it also gives me some hope that they can do this again with other guys as well. They've done it with Bradish, where he was a guy that the Angels drafted, the Orioles went out and got, have developed him to the point of what he is now. They've kind of done it with Grayson here, an immense talent. Obviously, they've made into what he currently is. And obviously, I don't want to overstate one game or 2 games, I guess, at this point, but he's looked really good. And you compound that with how good he was in the second half last year. And yeah, this is a dude right now. This is a dude. So Grayson gets MVP of the series. And then LVP, least valuable player. I don't think I could single out one player on the offense because it was all just bad. So what I am going to single out, though, is the Orioles' ability to hit left-handed pitching. This is something people have talked about. The Orioles have gone lefty heavy in their lineup to take advantage of the new dimensions at Camden Yards, where left field is a cavern and right field is a bit of a bandbox. They've got the high out of town scoreboard, but in general, much shorter dimensions, easier to get the ball out there. That has some ramifications in terms of performance against different handed pitchers. And the Orioles have struggled against lefties this year. They have a 58 WRC plus against lefties, which is 26th in MLB. And obviously, it's a small sample size, but the quality of the lefties that the Orioles saw in Pittsburgh wasn't, otherworldly. I'm sure these guys are going to be very solid, competent big league pitchers for a long time, but it's not it's not Clayton Kershaw out there. It's not even a healthy Carlos Rodon who the Yankees have, and we're probably gonna have to deal with for the next handful of years if he's good and healthy. They need to figure it out against these guys. And I'm not even going to put the blame on the left-handed hitters. Like, Gunnar isn't great against lefties, but it's more on the right-handed hitters who Hyde goes all righty against lefties, where, that's Urias in the line, not always, but Urias in the lineup, Hayes, Westberg. None of them are hitting very well against left-handed pitching. And then it becomes, okay, so is this platoon situation even viable if the guys that I'm using for the right-handed side of the platoon, if they're not hitting, what is the point of this? And then you get to the left-handed guys. Mullins has struggled against lefties. That's been a thing for a long time now. Henderson doesn't hit lefties as well. I think it's he's going to face righties a lot more, and he crushes righties, so it balances out. And obviously, he's got the defense I just mentioned, the speed. He's going to be in the lineup every day regardless. The only guys on the team that are doing well against lefties are Mateo, who's crushing it, and I think it's funny that he's doing so well against lefties, and there was definitely a portion of the fan base that was ready to cast him off coming into the season simply because Jackson Holliday is ready and Kobe Mayo's coming, and what do we need Mateo for? This is what you need Mateo for. He's one of the few guys on the team that can hit lefties. Plus, he's a good defender. I know he contributed to the error with Kremer in game 2 or game 3, but a good defender, fastest guy on the team. This is why Mateo's on the team, and he's going to have a role in almost every single game because he can come off the bench and face a lefty. He can start against a lefty. He can pinch run. Mateo's very important. Mountcastle crushes lefties and has for a long time. And then Rutschman, switch hitter, lefty against righties, righty against lefties. He does a nice job against lefties as well. But the Orioles, they have more right-handed hitters coming in Connor Norby and Kobe Mayo. Jackson Holliday's a lefty. They've got other guys coming, but they need the guys they have now to step it up, or else, they risk something happening there. Heston Kjerstad's a lefty, so that's probably not going to help him much. And, they've tried to keep Colton Cowser away from left-handed pitching, and I think he's had one at bat against them this year and struck out. So, it's a tough situation. It's not something you can solve right away, but they need to step up and at least be passable against left-handed pitching, or else that becomes a strategy against the Orioles moving forward, especially in the division. Um, and then I think the other thing I just wanted to talk about real quick was the possible platoon going on between Hayes and Colton Cowser. We could potentially be seeing the changing of the guard there. If they're really going to start using Cowser against righties and Hayes against lefties, that does not bode well for Hayes' future with the Baltimore Orioles. But it also makes me scratch my head a little bit with what the thought process was throughout the offseason to not try and trade Hayes. I understand you want to get good value for your players. Hayes was an all-star last year, and he's a guy that has a track record of being continuously an above average hitter, an above average fielder, an above average runner. Like he's a slightly above average at everything, and you don't just give those guys away, but you need to make the most out of the roster spots you have available. And if you think Colton Cowser is the guy that hits righties really well, then he's the guy you keep around and you go and find somebody to plug in to hit against lefties occasionally. It's not, I don't know that you have to hold on to two guys that are, you know, theoretically long-term pieces. I know Hayes only has one more year under contract, but I don't necessarily understand that when you could have traded a Hayes for a bullpen solution, which is something the Orioles still need. Although I will say people are complaining about the bullpen. I think the bullpen was fine in this series. Like I just said earlier, Kimbrel was good. Cano had one bad game, and Ballman was bad in one inning, but they got out of it. So the bullpen's been good, but I think you need more there. And Hayes or Urias or somebody could have been a guy you unloaded for a middle relief pitcher that could do some damage here, and the Orioles didn't do it. So that'll be interesting to keep track of. You're kind of in a spot now where you're not really going to make a trade. Cowser hasn't exactly lit the world on fire. He's got a good batting average, but he's still not hitting the ball super hard. He's hitting the ball on the ground a lot. So that's something to watch there. But interesting that the Orioles are potentially inching towards that that platoon situation, which I guess I should say I'm not super surprised by. Elias has made it a point to like not pave the way for young guys to just have a starting role. They need to like force their way in. Even Grayson, or I'm sorry, not Grayson, Gunnar came up and played second base, shortstop, third. They didn't really give him a position until, sometime into last year when he became like the shortstop when Mateo was really struggling. They kind of do that with all their guys, but I just kind of wonder, does that always make the most sense? I'm sure Elias thinks, yes, it does. You force your guys out and you don't just trade away quality veterans, which is true, but you got to make the most out of your roster spots. And does it make more sense to have Hayes, who is only going to face left-handed pitching, or does it make more sense to like replace a Jonathan Heasley with a competent, well, Heasley's competent, but you know what I mean, a proven middle relief pitcher in the big leagues. Um, they've decided for the moment that that's not the case, but just still interesting to keep an eye on. All right, we'll wrap this up by just talking about who's up next. The Orioles have 3 games against the Boston Red Sox. They will be the Red Sox home opener against them at Fenway Park this week. On Tuesday, Corbin Burns takes the mound. That's a 2:10 start. That game will be on MASN and MLB Network if you're outside the MASN viewing area. This is coming out on Tuesday, so you probably don't have too much time to figure that out. So hopefully you're listening early and can then get in on the game during the afternoon. Cole Irvin will pitch game 2. They kind of skipped him to let Burns stay on regular rest or close to regular rest. Irvin will make his second start of the year on Wednesday. That's a 7:10 start, again on MASN and MLB Network. And then Thursday, Grayson Rodriguez is back on the mound. Again, a 7:10 start, and again on MASN and MLB Network. The Red Sox are solid to start the year. Their pitching has been fantastic. I think they have the best ERA in baseball across both their rotation and their bullpen. Um, Hopefully the Orioles can disrupt that a little bit. I know Cutter Crawford's been really good this year. Nick Pavetta's been really good. The Orioles face both of them in games 2 and 3, while Brayan Bello is going to pitch in game 1 against Corbin Burns. And the Red Sox are 7-3 right now. They went up and down the West Coast, starting in Seattle, then to Oakland, and then Anaheim. So that's going to be the series there, the first AL East face-off of the year. So check that out. Hopefully the Orioles can get a sweep there and get back into the AL East crown discussion. But that's going to wrap us up. So thank you so much for listening. Please follow the podcast on social media at The Warehouse Pod on Twitter and Threads. Subscribe to us on YouTube if you haven't done already. We're at 271 subscribers. Would love to get to 300 by May. You guys have been awesome over there. So check us out on YouTube. And then subscribe to us on whatever your podcast app is of preference, Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever you go, get us there in audio form. And you can also email the podcast, thewarehousepod@gmail.com. So get in touch that way if you would like to. And if you're on YouTube, leave us a comment and tell us who you think was the MVP of the series in Pittsburgh. I know it was kind of a bummer of a series, but the Orioles still had some good moments. So let us know there who you have as the MVP in Pittsburgh. But that is all I've got. So until next time, I thank you for listening. My name is Tyler, and this has been the Warehouse Podcast. Take it easy.